Doug Austin, and I'm the editor of eDiscovery Today, a daily blog about eDiscovery, information governance, cybersecurity, and data privacy trends, best practices, and case law. Welcome to another edition of eDiscovery Today's Thought Leader Interview Series, where we interview thought leaders in eDiscovery and related legal technologies. Most of our thought leader interviews are published in written form, but today we're conducting a video interview. Video may have killed the radio star, but hopefully it won't kill the print media star, because then I'd be out of the job.
That's funny.
Thank you. With us today is Ron Godier. Welcome, Ron.
Hi, how are you? Good to see you again, Doug.
Good to see you, Ron. Ron is the founder and CEO of Intalegence, a legal-focused talent solutions company located in Chicago. With over 30 years of experience in talent acquisition, human resources, talent advisory and optimization, and workforce development, he advises companies involved in legal technology and services, as well as private equity firms on current trends like AI in HR and talent, and the ways the changing workforce dynamics are impacting companies' abilities to hire top talent. Over the course of his career, he's worked with and/or advised numerous organizations in the legal industry, from small and mid-sized law firms to large legal technology and services companies. He's a frequent presenter and speaker to bar associations around the country, legal industry podcasts, recruitment conferences, and will be presenting at Legal Week 2023. So, Ron, are you ready to get started?
You know, I am. I've been looking forward to this, Doug. You and I got to sit down and talk at Legal Week last year. I've been excited about the partnership. Everybody in my organization has been very excited about partnering with eDiscovery today. And so to be able to actually sit and talk again is nice. And lucky for me, you have a set of questions that seem to be pretty much in my wheelhouse. So I hope the folks out there who happen to watch this find it beneficial for them. But thanks again for having me on. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Ron. So Ron, how do you see the legal job marketplace today, and how do you think it's changed since the pandemic?
You know, right out of the gate, you hit me with a really good question, and there's a lot of esoteric answers that you can give to that. I think the reality, just to kind of give some context, is that the pandemic was not the cause of the shift in the legal talent market. It was an accelerator. It provided opportunities for people to work in different ways across a bunch of different industries, not just legal. As you said, I serve the private equity company as well. And what I have found is that work preferences have shifted across all industries. Legal was struggling, I really think, in the decade before. Particularly law firms was struggling in the decade before the pandemic, and that's really a generational shift. That generational shift has injected new belief systems, new work preferences, new ideas about the place that work occupies in someone's life, right? And so you find that law firms were struggling, especially big law firms, were struggling to hire people at the associate level and keep them beyond a couple of years. That problem is really twofold. First, it's the changing worker preferences, but it's also the institutional, the embedded nature of systems and process inside law firms that keeps younger attorneys, younger lawyers, people who may want to pursue that career. It keeps them from heading down that path. When you think about it, in the United States, the average track to partner is anywhere between 5 and 15 years. And in many cases, those people are non-equity partners, right? So sharing in the rewards is a long time coming, and right or wrong, I really believe that this is more about younger generations, later millennials, Gen Z, and clearly Gen Alpha. That's now beginning to get into the conversation. This is really more about understanding options. People are choosing different ways of earning income that fit into their life in a better way. So if I had to say what I think the biggest change is, I think we've accelerated that belief system, that thing that was already happening for a decade in legal, in law firms, in legal technology, across the entire spectrum of industries that we have. It's just pretty. It's pretty consistent. You see that cohorts in a particular generation tend to have preferences, at least in my experience, tend to have preferences that are driven by the way they grew up rather than the work that they do. And so when you think about boomers who are still in the workplace today versus Gen Z, you have people that are 180 degrees diametrically opposed in how they want to get work done. And I think the struggle in talent, in recruiting, has been the employer's inability to run and catch up to where the talent market actually was. So, it's a complicated question. I'm not sure we have enough time today to really get into it, but one of the things that I tell all of my clients is, stop assuming that this is a fad. Stop assuming that this will pass, because generational tendencies don't go away just because the work environment changes. Think of how people worked during the baby boomer era, and then think about how people work today. Those trends are only going to continue to become more ingrained and more entrenched in the way that people want to work and in the position that work will take in their life. I don't know if that answers your question completely, but that's kind of my take on what's changed. I just don't think you can nail it down and say it was just the pandemic, because I don't believe that that's the issue.
No, I think that's a great answer. And being on the tail end of the boomer generation myself, I can relate and have seen some of those differences firsthand. So yeah, absolutely, I certainly agree.
Even here in my office, right? So I have people who work for me. I only have one person that's here periodically. Right, everybody else is remote.
Mm-hmm.
I have people in Europe, I have people in South America, I have people in California, I have people in Arkansas. Right, we don't do anything the way we did before, and so being able to find ways to connect, to mentor people, to have meetings, those are the challenges that businesses struggle with in trying to figure out how to superimpose a work model from before on the way that people want to do it today. And that, to me, is where the real challenge comes into play.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly agree. So what do you think are some of the biggest challenges facing job candidates in the legal industry today, and how can they address those challenges?
The candidate perspective is interesting because we've watched over, particularly since the advent of job boards, candidates wanting more and more and more control over the process, right? Companies always want to be able to control candidate flow. If you're hiring internally, you build an internal recruiting department that serves the needs of the business. It doesn't necessarily serve the needs of the candidate. And to me, that's challenge number one. Until the system shifts where candidates truly drive the process with companies, people are going to have to learn how to work inside the system to get the job that they want. There was a study done a number of years ago, but I think it's still relevant today, by a company called Smashfly. And I attended a webinar from them, and they were talking about how candidates search for jobs today. And the average candidate today has anywhere between 15 and 18 different touch points that they look at before they ever make a decision to engage with a recruiter, right? Because they're trying to understand what the company's like, what's the culture like, what are the things that speak to the things I believe in. Is the company socially active? Do they take a stand on social issues? Even if I don't agree with that stand, I'd like to know where they are. That's an expectation today. And when you get into places like law firms and technology companies, sometimes they're reluctant to want to talk about those things. But I think candidates demand that. So when a candidate is out there and they're looking for a new job, the first thing you need to do is you need to research. You need to understand what the company is about to the best of their ability, of your ability. So, LinkedIn is there. I don't think it's the best recruiting tool anymore. I think that it's a great starting point, but it isn't the place where you're going to actually make hay as a recruiter. I just don't feel that anymore. Great starting point. There are other skills you need to have to really be successful. But as a candidate, you can take that and utilize your network. Who do I know who worked there? Who do I know who knows somebody who worked there, right? And begin to get in contact with those people to find out exactly what a company is like. This creates some problems for the employer, potentially, right? Because if they happen to get a hold of a disgruntled person, that view of that company goes down a little bit. But it is every candidate's responsibility to be in charge of your own career. And I think that trend is already in play. And I'll use kind of an odd analogy or an odd explanation here. But when you look at job boards, let's go all the way back to the 90s when those became prevalent. Every recruiter, inside, outside, external, agency recruiter, used those. And candidates were using that to put their wares out there for sale, right? Fast forward to LinkedIn. Every recruiter used it. Candidates were using it sometimes to leverage what they did, their skills. Now you can put out in LinkedIn, you can say, I'm open to network, which basically means I'm open to job opportunities, right? So that was all great. It sped up the process. It made it easier for us to identify candidates. But what it didn't do was it didn't give the candidate the touch points or the information that they needed to make a decision. So what you find now is response rates on LinkedIn have gone way down. And why have they gone down? Or candidates are very slow to respond. It's because in the background, unbeknownst to you as the internal recruiter, as the direct agency person, those people are researching companies. They're talking to people. They're looking at Glassdoor ratings. They're looking at, how do you talk about your employees? What is your employer brand? So for candidates, if you're not already doing this, what I'd say is research. That job, with the labor shortage that we have, the likelihood that you're going to lose that job after 3, 4, 5 days of research or an opportunity for that job is reduced, right? So take your time. Make sure that the law firm you're going to reflects the things that you want to do. If you have a bent towards becoming a partner, understand what that looks like. Talk to people who've worked there. Talk to people who've done that. If you're working at a legal technology company, like, let's say you're going to go to, oh goodness, I can probably think of 10, but let's say you're going to go work at Epic and you're going to be some kind of a systems integrator. Make sure they're working with the technology. It's not that hard to figure out what their tech stack is before you ever talk to them. And if that tech stack doesn't line up with where you want to go from a career perspective, don't do it. Pick those things that make sense to you, because what that does, two things. Number one, it puts you in a job that you actually want to be in. And number two, it forces the rest of the industry to look at what the people who are actually successful at hiring are doing. And that's how you affect change in the current environment. I actually happen to believe that the relationship between candidate and company is going to change dramatically over the next decade. But that's probably for another conversation.
Yes, indeed. Obviously, we could spend all day talking about that topic.
Sure.
So, and
sure.
Your discussion about this, and obviously, my first question addressed this. You addressed this a little bit, but I guess what I'd ask is, what else would you add to how hiring has evolved in recent years for organizations in legal, and what do they need to do to attract quality candidates today?
I think it's important to understand, anytime you talk about hiring, it's important to understand who your audience is, right? That audience is shifting. Its preferences are shifting. There was a study done. I can't remember the organization. I think it might have been by a CNBC survey, but they were talking about the shift in the youth of today and what they were thinking about in terms of work options. They surveyed a group of people between 13 and 17, and that may not sound like a formative time of really understanding what you're going to do, but it does give you some indication of preferences. And I think employers today need to understand more about what the preferences of the workforce 10 years from now is going to be. If you're building for the past, or you're building for a way to step back and say, this is the way we've always done it. We're going to try to keep as much of that as we can, and we're going to flex where we can with hybrid work environments or whatever the case may be. They're missing a critical part of this, and that is that the generations that we see now, later stage millennials, alpha, or Gen Z, and most certainly alpha, are not looking at employers. They're looking at options. They understand what their options are. There's a guy that I follow, and he's a digital marketing guy. His name's Gary Vaynerchuk, and he is one of the more astute people in understanding trends. And he's really turned his eye towards the workforce because the current labor shortage has affected him. And I think we're beginning to see some of what he's talking about in the future. But he said, and I don't want to, this is not an exact quote, but it's close. He said something to the effect, if you think the Great Resignation was bad, wait till you get to the Great Never Apply at all. Right? These people aren't entitled. They don't have a bad work ethic. They just don't want to work in the same way that they did before, at the same types of companies that they did before. So the best thing that I think an employer can do when it comes to hiring is to understand what the worker preferences are. Right? You have to understand how they want to work. Gen Z is much more tech-enabled than even the millennials. They've never been at a time where they didn't have a phone or a computer in their hands. They've been on social media. They've been researching and learning, and they understand what their options are in terms of, you know what, and Gary Vaynerchuk talked about this. I might only make $61,000 doing my own thing the first year, but if I can get that to $200,000 and I can still have the life that I want, that's a better option for me than being forced to commit to a 40-hour work week inside an organization, commit to a set number of billable hours that I have to hit every year. I'd rather do my own thing. And that's why you see people self-selecting out of careers that have those kinds of constraints, right? I mean, I'll use myself as an example. I'm 57, okay? I don't want to ever work in an office ever again. I like my people distributed. I like to know that they have the ability to have their own life. Now, some might say, well, your work allows that. But I would argue, and I would challenge everybody out there as an employer to begin to find those places where you can inject some of those options. And remote work in a law firm, terrifying concept, right? Terrifying concept. Fears about being able to manage someone, fears about being able to mentor someone. Will they get the work done? And here's one of the key things you need to understand. The generations of today, late stage millennials, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha, almost entirely focus on output. They don't care about the amount of time or the location that work gets done. They care about what the output is. And their argument will always be, well, if I give you what you need, why do you care when or where I do it?
Right.
Right. And so that's a seismic shift in a thought process for established companies, huge law firms that have always depended upon the names on the door to draw people in. And what do we see in law firms? We see people who come in, they take the job, they do it for 2 years to get it on their resume, and then they go to a smaller, more nimble firm that provides them a quicker path to equity if they really want that path, and it gives them the flexibility to do it when and where they want to work. More often than not, when I work with law firms, my thought process resonates much more with mid to small size law firms. Right? Because they're the ones that have gotten beaten up for so long in terms of competing for resources. Sure. And they're usually in smaller towns. But now you can actually sell that small town. I've got one in Colorado that we're doing work with. You can sell that smaller town, Colorado Springs area, lifestyle to someone who went to law school. And they're going to get paid a comparable amount, but they're going to have the life that they actually want. So the short answer to your question is figure out how to be an option of choice, not an employer of choice. That's the best thing that you can do. How can I create as much of what they want inside my practice, my firm, my legal technology company as I can? Is it feasible to take a giant freightliner, a kind of boat and turn it? No, big ship, small rudder. It takes time. But you at least have to show people that, hey, we hear exactly what you're saying. Here are the steps we're taking now, and here's the path. And you need to be able to communicate that in your employer branding, in your culture documents that go out. People internal in your organization need to be able to live that experience that you're telling candidates you're going to have. They need to be able to see the change. And the important reason for that is your culture is a funny thing, but it has a huge impact on whether somebody's able to hire or not. Culture is never what you think it is. It is always what everybody on the street thinks it is. So if you think you've got a great culture, but you've got 25 or 35 or 105 less than 4-star reviews on Glassdoor, you got a problem. You got a real problem, because that's one of the first places people are going.
Mm-hmm.
You have to get your head around it that candidates have leverage today. They're not going to take jobs just to take a job. There might be some short-term pullback of this if we really, do fall into a recession, because people might find it's harder to build a business than they think it is. And if capital dries up, there's a lot of, mitigating factors there. But ultimately, preferences and trends don't change because of a short-term hiccup. They just don't. They tend to be consistent. It's like real estate. You can have ups and downs in real estate, but if you look at the trend line over the last 150 years, you're going to make money in real estate if you put your money there, right?
Sure.
It's the same thing with worker preferences, because kids are raised differently today. They think differently today. Stop thinking of them as entitled or no good work ethic, and understand how they actually prefer to work, and make that shift in your business. That would be, there's a lot to it, Doug. Honestly, you could be in a situation where you need to train your recruiters better, right? Recruiters are often thought of as order takers. We process inbound candidates, but that's not the job of it. The job is of a relationship builder in the marketplace that can leverage candidates you talked to months ago for an opportunity today. And again, that's probably something for another conversation, but think about those things. How do we train our recruiters? How do we put them out into the market? How can we be an option of choice? That would be my suggestion.
Okay, great advice. And yeah, I couldn't agree
I hope
more.
so. I just feel like I'm kind of like rambling on for 20, 25 minutes at a time, but there's just a lot to it.
Sure, absolutely. I couldn't agree more about company culture. I think it's so important these days, and it's the real culture. It's not what the company's trying to achieve. It's what they're actually achieving that counts.
It's the life of that person inside the company every day. You can have wall words and a logo and a mission statement, but if you don't live that mission statement, if you don't live the culture you say you're trying to build, whether that's transparency or whatever the case may be, whatever motivators you pick to establish your culture, if you don't actually live that, that'll get around on the street really, really quick.
Yeah, I agree. Couldn't agree more. So kind of a little more specific question here. Which jobs and disciplines in legal are in most demand today? And what do candidates need to do to best position themselves for those positions?
Attorneys are always going to be in demand. If you look at the number of graduates per year over the last decade, it has steadily dropped. Part of that's due to, I think, the fear of student debt, right? I think that's an issue. And physicians, nurses, things that cost money to get a degree in, I think people are turning away from that. I think also our economy keeps growing and we keep adding more jobs than we possibly have bodies to fill. We're 400,000 to 500,000 upside down on January 1 every year across all industries, right? The pandemic threw a wrench into that because it took people out of the workforce. Senator Mitch McConnell recently made a comment, and again, I don't want to quote him. It's not a political
Right.
This is not a political comment, but he made a comment that basically said, the issue that we have right now is that people are flush with money that they got from the pandemic. And we can only hope that when that money runs out, they'll decide it's better to work than to not work. I think that's pretty close to what he said. That's a horrible, number one, misunderstanding of what happened to the funds that came out of the pandemic. Some companies may have stockpiled that money a little bit if they could, right? Some of the PPP funding, but people, in kitchen table issues, they were literally using that money to get through when they got cut.
Right.
So the idea that they're just sitting on this lump of cash to be able and have decided not to work is foolish. Secondly, the other impactor to it was that during the pandemic from 2020 to 2022, the number of LLC filings in the United States went up by 27%. The number of freelancers in the United States went up by 23%. And what happened there, by most accounts, is that people always, particularly younger generations, had side hustles or things that they had thought they might do at some point in their life. This gave them the opportunity to do that. Now, are all of those people going to be successful? No. But when you think about that, that took a sizable chunk of the workforce out that's never coming back. It's never coming back. People have made businesses out of companies like Upwork or Fiverr or some of these other freelance sites, and they're making as much money as they did before, but on their terms, right? Now, I'm not sure that they've given thought to what the benefits cost, what companies were actually investing in them, because it's significant, right? I know that when I went out on my own, after being an employee in a company, I was shocked, even though I kind of knew what it was like. I was the managing director for a software development and staffing firm, but I was still shocked by what the real costs behind it were and how they go up each and every year, right? Some of that stuff is hidden to certain employees. They don't see those things. So I think that there will be some lessons about that. But remember, people have had 2 years now with no real talk of a recession and an opportunity to build a business. Those that are coming back because they failed are probably already on their way. But those that succeeded are going to stay right where they are, okay? Secondly, people made career changes. We had people who had a degree in one thing said, you know what, this is the perfect time. If I'm ever going to do it, now's the time to do it. And they've spent time making a career change. So those places like healthcare, legal, technology, where we already had significant shortages of employees based against, the total number of openings that we had, those places are in trouble. They're in trouble. I would say to get back to your original question after my long time drive there, I think, if you decide you want to be an attorney, there's going to be work for you, right? There's going to be work for you. If you have technology skills, where you're a developer in, emerging technologies, or in legal, the big push now is AI. So, if you have any machine learning in your background, if you have any, programming in terms of user interface, right? If you have any front end, back end, or full stack skills, there's probably going to be a job for you in legal tech companies. The challenge is, I guess the advantage is you don't have to, if you have technology skills, you're not locked in to legal, because legal tech companies compete with Google, they compete with Facebook, they compete with everybody out there. So you either have to find someone in that space who agrees with your mission, what you're trying to do, or you have to work on something that's really, really cool. So think about it from those standpoints. I would also say that there is, in legal, if you don't want to go through years and years and years of training, but you want to work in that space, think about becoming a paralegal. There's a huge, huge shortfall of those folks, right? Really, really good paralegals. And to me, paralegals and court reporters are the two areas that a company can use automation or technology to make themselves more effective at a law firm, or if you're a service provider and you hire court reporters, there's a ton of things that you can do out there from a technology perspective. We used to think depositions couldn't be done like we're doing them right now.
Right.
However you fall in this, you can look at the January 6th committee and see depositions can be done just like this all day long, which is a huge cost savings, right, for companies. But if you have the ability to work in audio visual, if you have the ability to set up technology that would allow remote depositions, if you can figure out how to gigify eDiscovery work, like review, right? And that's already happening. I mean, XDD and Concilio coming together with their technology, there's an opportunity to do those kinds of things. So my suggestion is pick those things that you see shortages in, that fit what you want to do, and then find the organizations that, that fit kind of your mental frame in how you want to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And great point about paralegals. The eDiscovery project managers and eDiscovery directors of today are the paralegals of yesterday. A lot of those came up through the ranks and became that indispensable person that is leading eDiscovery eDiscovery programs, throughout organizations.
100%. In fact, we, in my past, I worked for an eDiscovery company called Xantaz before they were purchased by Autonomy and ultimately HP. And I was tasked with helping them figure out two things. One, how to make their teams work a little more effectively. And secondly, to help them staff both on the operations side, taking data in, ingesting it, getting it into the system, and then how they set up their project teams. And one of the things that we used to hire all the time, paralegals, bring paralegals in because they were great client service teams and they could work up and through the ranks there. So that's been around for a while now. There are going to be more opportunities. United Lex does things like that. There's bunches of companies. Concilio does things like that. There's just a bunch of opportunities for you out there. And you can kind of pick which fork you want to go down, technology in terms of product management, or whether you want to stay on the legal track. There'll be a bunch of options available to you, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Speaking of technology, how has technology recently most impacted the legal jobs market in terms of the staffing process, as well as what tech skills employers are expecting from their candidates?
Oh, that's a loaded question for more reasons than you might expect. First, I think technology has allowed both employers and candidates to locate each other more quickly and more effectively. What technology has done is, and I'll go back to the LinkedIn example. What technology has done is it has allowed recruiters to locate resources very, very quickly, right? We can look on LinkedIn, I can run a search, and very quickly, I can determine the bulk of a market in a particular skill set in a particular geography, right? And then I can use built-in filters and other things, Boolean searches, to be able to whittle that, narrow that list down to a select group of candidates. In the past, when I grew up in recruiting, it was really a situation. I used to call myself a shoebox recruiter. I had a shoebox full of 3x5 cards of candidates that I've talked to, and I had a shoebox full of 3x5 cards of companies that I knew, skill sets, who my contacts were. And when the time came, I got an order from a client, I would sit down and I would look through my shoebox of recruiters, or my shoebox of candidates, to figure out, okay, that one might fit, that one might fit, that one might fit, right? Today, you can do that. What used to take me days takes me a couple of hours now, if I really dig in and try to search. And there's so much automation that's available to me as a recruiter to automate the process of beginning interaction. Okay. You have to be smart about it. You have to know how to build good messaging. But at the end of the day, once I've built my messages, I can automate some of that to get the first steps going while I continue working in other areas, right? So when I think about the impact of technology, on the process, both for candidates and companies, is that it can move faster. That's really what it does. And any technology, any software, its ultimate goal is to remove friction in a process, right? That's really what it's about. It's there to speed up and knock down obstacles. To the second part of your question, what should employers expect of their candidates in terms of technical skills? I think, did I get that right? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I think employers don't really, in general, understand just how tech savvy these folks are. Any program you set at them, within reason, they're going to be able to figure out. Because what software developers done is and what companies who build products have done is they've built user-friendly UI, user interface, right? It's really a something that can be self-taught. I know for myself, if somebody sends me a piece of software to evaluate, or hey, we're thinking about this ATS, I don't need to go to the company to figure out the basic functionality of it, right? I can do that myself because it's very self-explanatory. What I think is a more interesting thing to consider is, what do candidates expect of their employers from a technical perspective? Because that's usually where it breaks down. You think about a law firm. Law firms are historically, and I know they're getting better, but they're historically tech averse, right? You have people managing vendors and I know for a fact in larger law firms doing it on an Excel spreadsheet that they've built themselves, rather than looking at real vendor management solutions that help them, compare prices, look at different vendors, evaluate and vet those vendors for their particular needs. A good friend of mine is still trying to put a product like that out in the market today. And the amount of pushback is it's ridiculous. And it's a no-brainer kind of decision. If I can have it all in one place, I can manage it all in one place, and I don't need to go through this complicated list of vendors. I can get exactly what I want when I want it. So I think that the real challenge, Doug, is less about what employers should expect from their people from a technical perspective. It's, do the employers know what the candidates expect from a technical perspective? Are you providing work enablement technologies that give them the ability to truly multitask, that allow them to do what I talked about before? I'll give you an example. Right now, as we're speaking, I have recruiting messages going out for an executive search that I'm working on. There are 100 of them that'll go out today as an initial introduction that I've taken the time to build, personalize, and put in place. But those messages are running while we're talking. So I'm free to do other things. I'm free to put myself in other positions or in other situations that demand my attention. And I think employers need to start to think about that. How do we make the person's life easier? Because if everything is a manual task and everything is contained on a server at home or at the home office, then of course you have to have people there to do the work. But if you start thinking about how can I reimagine my business so that I can provide some of this enablement, so that I can provide opportunities for people to focus on output rather than time, that's how I think people will win. Because the kids today, honestly, you're not going to be able to throw much at them that after a couple of weeks they're not going to be able to figure out, because they've done nothing but technology their entire life. It's different for guys in our age group, right? We didn't grow up that way. We've had to adapt and adopt and get ourselves in a place where we were really focused on how this particular piece of technology could help me. Our evaluation process was much longer. Kids of today, I don't like that social app, it's gone. I don't even think about it. I don't even look at it. Ask the average 18-year-old, I guarantee you they're not on Facebook. Ask the average 60-year-old, they're all on Facebook, right?
Of course.
Why? Because it's the one we're most familiar with, and we tend to go to those things that we're familiar. Whereas the kids today look at technology and they go, "What helps me get what I'm looking for?"
Right. Yeah.
Is that? I know that's not really the answer I think you were looking for, but I think it's in the context of the question, in the context of this conversation, it's actually more relevant to think about. And no offense to your question, but it's actually more relevant to think about kind of how the new employee looks at the technology that you provide to them.
Sure. No, I think it's a great point that the younger people of today are much more readily able to move between technologies as they decide ones don't work for them. And
Sure.
people who are older tend to stick with something they know. I've certainly seen that.
Oh, I do.
Yeah, I've
I
certainly
know
seen
I
that.
do. So,
Oh, yeah, I do as
yeah.
well. And I've seen that in our industry. People are still using platforms that, might be considered, really at this point, legacy. But
Yeah.
they're using them because they've got a comfort with them, they've got the established workflow, and they don't want to change. Even though all the aspects of what's going on in our industry today is really forcing change, they're really kind of holding on, and that's one of the things I've seen.
Sure. And it's what impacts business development efforts for better products to actually come to market in large law firms or corporations.
Right.
Because the people develop a level of comfort. They don't like to get outside of that level, that area of comfort. They're very risk averse.
Right.
And so even though they could be more efficient, more effective with product A over here, product A gets pushback when they try to take it into an organization because it's different. Right. It might be app-based, where things reside in the cloud. Things that your data might not reside on site in a partitioned server, right? I mean, I think people are becoming more comfortable with the cloud and the security that you're able to, to apply to that. You see that in medical with all the, the companies moving towards Amazon Cloud Services because they now have protections for HIPAA, right? They're able to guard people's data in a way. It's just I think it's a fascinating time to see all these generations try to figure out how to play in the same sandbox. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, you have to look forward. Again, I go back to my comment earlier. If you intend for your business to be around 10 years from now, you need to start thinking about what that workforce 10 years from now is going to want. And the reason I say 10 years, maybe more if you can, is because it takes time to turn, against a tide. It takes time to move big ship, small rudder again. You're not just going to turn on a dime. It's going to take you a while to figure out those things. And that's where you need a professional, someone, a consultant who can come in and help you work through those things, understanding your workforce, understanding the people who work for you currently today and where you have weaknesses and where you need to fill in terms of how you hire. That's called talent optimization. That's one of those things that, at my company, we'll go in and assess an entire organization and map it to business objectives and then go, okay, well, these, personalities over here, you're sorely lacking to actually meet the business objectives that you're looking for. Let's begin to think about hiring to fill in those gaps where we can.
Sure. No, that makes perfect sense. So I just have one more question for you.
Sure.
The question I always ask, which is, what would you like to tell our audience about what you and Intalegence are doing?
I struggle sometimes, even though I'm proud of the work that we do. I often feel somewhat uncomfortable talking about what we're doing, but I think we're doing some incredible work. As I said at the top, we work with law firms. Our work this year has been really kind of law firm heavy. It's also been private equity heavy, which has put us in a lot of different portfolio companies in varied industries. And that in and of itself has given me, at least from the advisory work that I've done, it's given me a vantage that the problems are very similar across the board, what we're seeing with the workforce. So I'm comfortable when I talk about those things. In essence, we are focused on things like executive search. If you need a general counsel, if you need a chief compliance officer, we just placed a chief compliance officer with a real estate development and investment company. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. I know it was for us. I think it was for the client, but we heard wonderful things about it from the candidate as well. Our primary focus is providing service to those people in the places where it makes the most sense. If that's an executive hire, if that's advisory, if that's employer branding, trying to understand the message you want to convey and then putting it into a format and into the modalities, into the locations where it needs to be successful for you in your organization. We are focused heavily on, I mentioned earlier, the idea that the candidate experience is going to shift dramatically over the next 10 years. And that it's my belief that in 10 years, candidates will drive the process rather than companies. And so we're exploring software to be able to facilitate that. We're exploring things like AI inside that software to help candidates make better decisions. Companies use this. And if my expectation is correct that in 10 or 15 years, candidates will have more control than they do today, and if we can be a part of that, then it sets us up for a great to be in a great position, I think, at that point. We're a small boutique firm. We believe in custom solutions. Not every company is a cookie cutter. Not every law firm is the same. The personalities alone that fit inside of a company vary from organization to organization to organization. We do a lot of training, both in terms of training managers how to interview, how to be able to get the most beneficial information they can out of any interview process. So we teach them about behavioral interviewing, about case study interviewing, about stress interviewing, to understand how a person's actually going to operate inside that organization. And then we are, I think, very invested in training recruiters to operate differently. And what I mean by that is recruiters are often under such pressure, and I know we're going to be up against time here, so I'll try to keep it brief, but recruiters are often up against so much pressure to produce results that they end up reinventing the wheel every time they go out to recruit. Oh, I got a lawyer. Okay, I'm going to go recruit. Oh, I got a lawyer. Okay, I'm going to go recruit. And our philosophy is that, oh, I've got a lawyer opening in my organization or a GC opening. I'm going to go to my established network where I have relationships, and I'm going to go there first. It's the first place that I'm going to go. And that may reside inside your ATS, your applicant tracking system, or it may reside in LinkedIn or some other, method of communication that you have, some other tracking mechanism. But I'm always going to go to those things. So we try to focus people on building relationships. There's always going to be something on fire, but how do we build relationships that we can leverage down the road? And to me, if you can change the way the process works internally, you ultimately end up benefiting the candidate. Candidates will be more receptive. Everything seems to work together, but all those pieces come together. I don't know that was a good answer of what we do or how we do it, but we try to be not all things to all people. We have very specific areas that we're going to work in, but in those areas, I feel like the people we have give us the best ability or the best chance for success for us and for our clients.
Great. No, I thought that was a terrific answer. I definitely have learned.
You're so good for my ego, man.
We're partners, and I'm still learning more about you. So this is great.
You are so good for my ego. You just make me feel like I'm actually probably smarter, than I really am.
And I thought that was a really well informative interview, and really appreciate your time, Ron. Thank you for joining the Thought Leader interview series, and thanks to all of you for watching our interview with Ron. And hope we'll catch you next time on the eDiscovery Today Thought Leader interview series.